so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Could you tell us a little bit about your role at Africa50 and what it is that you do there?
Absolutely, happy to. Well, I'm the General Counsel at Africa50, and Africa50 is an infrastructure investment platform for the continent of Africa. Our shareholders are African states, African central banks, and the African Development Bank. So we work with those shareholders and invest equity or equity-like products into African infrastructure projects. We also have a project development arm where we will act as sort of proxy sponsors and work with governments or other sponsors in making sure that projects that they have or that are priorities for them get to the point of being bankable, so that the private sector will be interested in the project. So we can take money and fund feasibility studies, market studies, other due diligence. We can negotiate with the governments on heads of agreement or term sheets for project documents, so that again, the project gets to a point where the private sector is going to be interested. So we can write relatively small checks, but big checks from an at-risk developmental perspective of $2 to $10 million to fund those projects. But our human capital is obviously substantially bigger for those projects. The other side of the coin is we have the project finance part, where we invest significant minority equity stakes into projects at financial close, along with the rest of the debt and equity. So right now we have about $850 million of capital that we are ready to invest in infrastructure projects. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm here at the African Assembly Oil and Gas Council, because we're really interested in gas to power. Two of our priority sectors are powering Africa and transport. And so we're really interested in looking at baseload power. We love renewables, we love solar, we love wind, but those will not create baseload power for Africa. And making sure that Africa is electrified is really the most important developmental component to seeing Africa progress.
So are you working with small to mid-cap independents, indigenous companies as well? Tell me a little bit about the variation of projects that you are working on at the moment.
We will work on any infrastructure project that fits within the sectors of power, transport, also ICT, telecommunications, and water, that we think can be bankable and that we think will be developmental. The bankable part is really important because we are a commercial enterprise. Although we're owned by African states, we eventually will be raising money from the private sector as well. And all of our shareholders expect dividends. They expect returns. And so we are working so that we will provide them with returns. So in a way, we're like the African Development Bank or the IFC, in that shareholders are states at this point. However, unlike them, we are working to provide returns to our shareholders. So we do operate as a commercial entity. So who the sponsors are, we are really quite agnostic.
And you spoke about gas earlier. Gas does really seem to be like the trending word of the moment. Everyone is talking about gas. Everyone is talking about energy transition. Where do you see the opportunities or the greatest opportunities within Africa?
The opportunities within Africa are really keyed off of making sure that Africa is sustainable. From an economic perspective on a long-term basis. So when countries and when the market looks at all of the fantastic gas finds that are occurring, have occurred and are occurring in Africa, the immediate thought is often LNG and LNG export, because those are so profitable. They provide so much revenue. But it is also very important, and I think that states understand this, to make sure that they are investing in the countries themselves. It doesn't make sense to export all of the gas if your people and your industries don't have reliable access to power. And so that's the area that we find really interesting, is figuring out, working with African governments to see how they can best utilize these gas reserves so that, yes, they can earn revenues from exports, but they can also make sure that they and their neighboring countries are able to be electrified, again, for the human population, and even more importantly, to a certain degree, for the industry.
You're speaking in very positive terms here, which is a trend that I've seen across the delegates who are attending Africa Assembly. What is your opinion on the state of the future of African resources and the industry as a whole?
I think that right now is an extremely exciting time for Africa and Africa infrastructure. I was part of the Obama administration as general counsel of OPIC, the U.S. government's development finance institution. And at OPIC, we were very involved in President Obama's initiative, Power Africa. I think through Power Africa and other things that have happened on the continent, like the gas fines, the world, the private sector, is really interested in Africa. It is a pie that is growing in terms of economic investment. And there aren't that many places where that pie is growing in the same way. So I think it's a really exciting time. I do think that it is important that those of us who want to work in Africa and want to see Africa really start to develop even more quickly than it already has, now is the time to make it happen. I do fear that in 10 years, if we haven't made a lot of progress in 10 years, people will get distracted and be off looking at another shiny object. So I'm very optimistic, but I really think that there is a sense of urgency that we all have to have.
And from Africa50's perspective, how are you trying to manage that urgency and moving forward within, say, the next 5 years?
We have really just gotten up and running in a real way. Our CEO was hired just a little less than 2 years ago, but our senior leadership team actually was complete yesterday with our CFO coming on board. So we are here now and fully engaged with creating this pipeline of bankable projects. We believe that we are going to make a difference. We believe that we will be investing our $850 million plus in capital, raising other capital from sources like African pension funds, international pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, with the understanding that because of our unique perspective and our unique position of having shareholders that are governments, and governments that expect to see a return on their investment, we can work with the governments to make sure that projects are able to move forward, projects that should move forward are able to move forward without some of the delays that typically happen or are expected to happen.
I want to talk to you about the Africa Assembly and the kind of discussions that have been happening both on the stage and within the networking breaks, over lunch, over coffee and tea. You were involved in some of those discussions. Were there any highlights for you from the panel discussions that happened on stage?
Absolutely. The gas panel that I participated in was very interesting. It was very interesting to hear developers and explorationists talk about their vision of where Africa was going and the technological advances that are occurring with LNG, including sort of the smaller scale LNG and floating LNG, that may be able to make the gas deposits in Africa even more economic than they might have been when the only option was sort of the giant LNG terminals. That's something that I find very interesting and think it may be a good synergy of technology occurring just at the right time for the continent.
I love that word, synergy. There seems to be a lot of that happening at the Africa Assembly. Another of the discussions that I would like to touch on is the women's breakfast briefing that you were a part of. Where do you think we are in terms of diversity within the E&P industry?
That's not an area that I have done a lot of work in. What I am an expert in, so to speak, is infrastructure and emerging markets and infrastructure in Africa. I'm also a finance person. I've spent my entire career providing financing from banks or to developers. So I do know that without question, companies that have diversity throughout their ranks, from the lowest level to the highest levels, make better decisions. They think about things in a greater contextual world, and that is extremely important. And you are starting to see people talk about that more. That it's not, we need to have women in these positions because it looks bad because we don't have any women in these positions, but we need to have women in these positions because it's smart from a financial perspective. We're going to make more money, we're going to be more profitable if we have diversity. And I think that that is an amazingly wonderful place where we are getting to. We're not there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but the fact that we're getting there is something that I don't think I would have believed 20 years ago.
And in terms of the diversity of different players and companies, investors that are coming together at this assembly, where do you think the value lies in that?
Oh, I think it's always helpful to have people from different aspects of an industry get together in the same room or collection of rooms and talk to each other about where they see the industry going. It's also very helpful just to talk to people offline, outside of the panels, about how's your project really going. I've been having conversations with some people who have projects in Cameroon, and the way that they talk about their projects, you can tell they're excited and they're not frustrated. They're thinking that the projects are going very well. And that gives me an indication of, oh, Cameroon is a really interesting place for us to make sure that we're paying attention to. So I think those offline conversations are particularly helpful.
And this is your first Oil and Gas Council event.
That's right.
So what are your first thoughts?
Oh, my thoughts are it's been an excellently run conference. I have definitely felt as though I was attending a conference with about 10 people because they have taken such good care of me, which I really appreciated. And the conversations have been quite substantive. It has been really helpful and interesting to hear the substantive conversations. It hasn't really been a marketing couple of days. It's been a couple of days where people want to discuss the topics that they have. And I think part of that is probably because there are a lot of scientists here. There are a lot of engineers. There are a lot of geologists. There are a lot of other scientists who have titles I've never personally heard of before. And they want to talk about what they do because they have a real passion for it. And yesterday on the panel on women in the industry, I was bowled over by the fact that there were 2 women on the panel who are scientists and have gone out on floating rigs and have done all sorts of things from a geological petroleum engineer perspective that are just remarkable. And I am so proud to be part of an organization, even as an attendee and part of a panel where there are women like that who are so incredibly impressive.
Well, it's all looking very positive, a lot to look forward to. Is there anything that you're looking forward to? Any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Well, I am just so excited to be part of Africa50. I do think we were created by the African Union and by PETA to be one of the innovative solutions to the infrastructure gap in Africa. And I really do believe that we can make a difference. I do believe that we are innovative. The combination of being sort of state-sponsored in that our shareholders are countries, but very commercially oriented, and our teams, our investment teams, are from the private sector. We've all spent years in the private sector doing investments. I think those combinations make Africa50 extremely unusual, very innovative, and our mandate is to get stuff done, to get deals done in an appropriate manner, in a risk-adjusted manner, but to get them done. And I think we're going to do that. And so I'm really positive about the impact that Africa50 can have, and I can't wait to be a few years out and look back and be extra proud.
Well, best of luck to you, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.